Welcome to another episode of Discovering the Jewish Roots. I'm Dr. Rick Wadge. We're continuing our study in the Gospel of Matthew. We're looking at the Gospel of Matthew from a Hebraic, a Jewish perspective. We're also looking at and comparing the Greek translation from the Aramaic, which I would call the original writing of the apostle, which would be from the time of Yeshua, very quickly afterwards. We're looking at the rabbis during that time period, and the gospel writers, the apostles at that time, would have all written probably in Aramaic as their first spoken language, in Hebrew, versus then the other languages of the day, primarily would be Greek. But we know that the translation in Greek happened early in the first century for sure. It spread throughout Asia Minor and then throughout Europe, the rest of the world, translated, of course, into Latin. St. Jerome would translate that into the modern vernacular at the time in those areas of the world as well. But we're looking at this from the language and the culture of Yeshua, of Jesus, and the apostles and the disciples, because it's from that perspective we find the true meaning of the idioms, the phraseology, the things that are being spoken at that time, so we can understand how to apply those things from the Master in our own lives. Now, if you recall last week, we were looking at Matthew chapter 5, verse 4, where it says, "Oh, the gladness of those who mourn, for they will be comforted." And I'm just going to take us back one section here to Psalm 34:18. So if you take a look at that, it tells us about Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh's heart for the people that have broken hearts. He has a heart for those who have broken hearts. And he saves, according to David, he saves those who are crushed in spirit. You know, friends, I mean, we could just take the entire time just to talk about God's love for people, his care, his compassion for people, because he saves, he rescues, he brings them out of troubled situations, those who have crushed spirits, those who have crushed hearts, those who have been through horrible times in their lives. They had expectations, things turned out a very different way. You know, as we record this and teach this morning, you know, what's going on in the world is horrible. We have bombs and rockets constantly being lobbed over from Gaza into Israel. We have the Israelis constantly in fear for their lives. They're running with their children into bomb shelters constantly, every single day right now. We have trouble throughout the world. We have anti-Semitism on the rise again, as it was in the time of Nazi Germany in many areas. We have all these problems against the Jewish people, which as Christians begin to understand their Jewish heritage in the scriptures, in the bloodline of Yeshua, that we come under the gate of Judah, we come into the tribe of Judah, grafted in, not replacing, then we begin to understand the more we act like our rabbi, the more we study the Torah, the more we look through the lens of the Jewish people, the more we too will be persecuted for our faith in a Jewish Messiah, who's very Jewish. And we find all the way through the Gospel of Matthew, these Jewish idioms and phrases, certainly all pointing back to the scriptures in the Tanakh. As Christians, we often call it the Old Testament. But friends, there's nothing old about it at all. It is our tent peg to hold up our lives. And that is so true. So being comforted means that God saves people and he makes them whole again. He sees their sighing. He sits closely with them. Get that imagery of what's going on. It also indicates an embrace while sighing. God does that for us while we're mourning over our sense of loss and our need for Him. He comforts us. And if you recall, we kind of left it at a cliffhanger last week, and that is, we talked about this mourning over and this sense of dying, that we're mourning over one who has died. But friends, we left it with this: who has died? Well, the answer is us. We have died. That's where this road of following after a crucified and then resurrected Messiah leads us, that we have to die. If we're going to imitate the crucified Messiah, then we have to die to ourselves. Galatians 2:20, we are crucified with Christ, nevertheless we live. Yet not I, but Christ lives in us, and the life we now live, we live in faith of the Son of God who died for us. I mean, that's the summarization of Galatians 2:20. He died, the Messiah died, so that we can now live. We die to ourselves so that He can live through us. And that's a choice. You remember, when we started the Beatitudes, we said that it was all about choices, and that is so true. And it's a choice that we make if we're going to die to ourselves and allow the Messiah to live in and through us. Mashiach, the Anointed One, anoints our lives as He lives in us. You want to live an anointed life, one that God has sanctified, set apart for His good will, His good works? Then you have to allow the Anointed One to live in you, and He can only do that as you die to yourself. Now remember that the designation then of comforter in Jewish literature at the time of Yeshua in the Second Temple period, 1st century, was a designation for the coming Mashiach, of Messiah, that He would come, He would comfort His people. And you can find that examples in Sanhedrin 98b and Berachot 2, 4, and 5a. This is the context of John 14. We're going to jump into the Gospel of John 14, chapter 14, verse 15 through 18. Take a look at this. Yeshua is speaking, and He says, "If you love me, then keep my commandments. And I will ask of my Father, and He will give you another Comforter," indicating that you've already been comforted by whom? By Him, by His words, His teaching, His lifestyle. "That He may be with you forever." Who? The Comforter. "The Spirit of truth," verse 17, "whom the world cannot receive because it can't see Him, does not know Him, but you know Him because He abides in you and is in you." Now, the interesting thing about this is, look at the way the world sees things. It's always through the senses, the physical senses. But He's saying that's in sharp contrast to the way that the believer sees things, because he can also sense through the Spirit, because He abides with you, the Spirit abides with you, and He abides in you. And He goes on, Yeshua speaking in verse 18, "I shall not leave you as orphans, for I shall come to you in a little while." Now, the crowd that heard Yeshua speak on both of these occasions would have understood that He was clearly saying that He was the Nacham, He was the Comforter, therefore He was Mashiach. In fact, in Isaiah chapter 40, that passage is seen as ultimately fulfilled through Messiah. Look what it says in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 1. It says, "Comfort, comfort my people, says your God." God's people were looking for comfort, my friends. We still are, but they were looking for comfort in the 1st century. They were being oppressed by the Romans. They had experienced several losses, one after another, and this is why they were so endeared to Psalm 23. Psalm 23, verse 4. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Now, the Jews of Yeshua's day were searching for comfort even in the discipline, the rod of the Lord, even as seen underneath the harshness of the Romans. They were seeing that as being the rod of the Lord for the time period, but they were looking then for the staff of guidance. They were looking for comfort. So God sent the Messiah to comfort His people. And did you know that the rabbis during the time of Jesus, Yeshua, expected those who wanted to be followers of God, wanted to be followers of his Messiah, that they would also bring comfort to the people as well? Well, they did. In other words, followers of God, imitators of God, Talmudim, those who are students and learners, disciples we call them, imitate their rabbi. Now, this is from the Babylonian Talmud, Sotah 14a. It says this: what means the text that you shall walk after the Lord your God? Is it possible for a human being to walk after the presence of God? Has it not been said, for the Lord your God is a devouring fire? But the meaning is to walk after the attributes of the Holy One, blessed be He. As He clothes the naked, so you should also clothe the naked. The Holy One, blessed be He, visits the sick, so you should visit the sick. The Holy One, blessed be He, comforts the mourners, so you should also comfort the mourners. Remember Yeshua's very similar discussion in Matthew chapter 25. And he said this: then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, and inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. And I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. And then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly, Amen. I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. Now, so far in the Sermon on the Mount, Yeshua, Jesus, is being a very typical Jewish rabbi of the day, and he reinforces the majority of the moral teachings of the other rabbis of his day as well. And I really want you to get that, because when it hit me as I was reading through the other rabbis of the Tanaim period, that period of time which Yeshua also taught, I found that it was very typical teaching of the day, which comforted me and helped me understand that he wasn't coming up with something new. As they said, he was coming up with something with great authority. They saw him as being the inspiration of the rabbinical truth of the day. They saw him as being one who was very traditional in his understanding of Torah, of God's lessons, of God's instruction manual, and that he was teaching from that. Now, why is that important? Because if Yeshua, the Messiah, did not teach from the Torah, did not teach from the Tanakh, the prophets and the writings, then he would be considered a false prophet, and he was not. He was a true prophet from God who supported the Torah in every possible way, fulfilled it in the sense of not making it be done away with, but completing it, saying, look, this is what it looks like when you follow after God's word fully. You will give your life away, and God will raise it up again. Put your brothers first, put God first, put yourself second, and God will be able to live and work through you because he created us for those good works. Look at what it says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 5, as we're back in the Sermon on the Mount. Oh, the gladness of the humble, for they will inherit the earth. Now, we're told here that the meek will inherit the earth. It's a different translation. We don't typically understand the Hebraic message, though, of what he's saying, because this is a quote from Psalm 37, 9 through 11. So let's go there so we can put this all back into context and understand exactly what the Messiah meant when he's quoting from King David.
Did you know that the book of Matthew was originally written in Aramaic, the language of Jesus? You know, there comes a time in a person's life when you want to know what you believe and why you believe it, when you have to stop the madness of the modern world and go back to where you first believed. You can do that with Israel TV Network. For the first time in over 2,000 years, A line-by-line commentary on the Aramaic original book of Matthew has been created by Dr. Rick Wadge. You can learn along by watching Israel TV Network, Discovering the Jewish Roots. You can own this piece of history by going to Amazon.com and ordering Discovering the Jewish Roots of the Book of Matthew. Stop the world, enhance your mind with the unchanging Word of God today.
And this is what it said in Psalm 37. For the evildoer shall be cut off. Very, very Jewish, right? But those who wait for the Lord shall inherit the land, or shall inherit the earth. Bad translation though, earth. In just a little while, it says in verse 10, the wicked will be no more. Though you look carefully at his place, he will not be there. But the meek shall inherit the land, there's our quote, and delight themselves in abundant peace. Now here in Matthew chapter 5, Sermon on the Mount, verse 5, Yeshua is quoting from Psalm 37, where very clearly the context is the Jewish people inheriting their apportioned land in Israel, and through their state of humility, they finally will have peace. Now, the Greek New Testament can mean either land or earth. So it's in agreement, of course, with the Hebrew of Psalm 37, which is haaretz, the land. Haaretz, in this kind of context, always means one place, and that is Israel, the land, haaretz. Now, it's saying that those who are humble will inherit Israel, the land of Israel, the land, the promised land given to the forefathers and passed down all the way through the Israelis. So the interesting thing in this phrase is the inheriting of the land, haaretz, because it was also, now check it out, get this, pause for a moment, really pay attention. This is so good. It was also a common Hebrew idiom for, check it out, the resurrection. In other words, if you live in a right relationship with God, in the resurrection, you'll inherit the land that God promised to your forefathers when Mashiach reigns on the earth. Now, this promise was spoken to Jews and was understood to mean the meek of the Jews. Those who practiced gentleness would then inherit their allotment in the land of Israel. In other words, by putting others first here, God will take care of you there. Matthew chapter 5, verse 6. But isn't that great? It's amazing. It's not the earth as much as it is the land that they've been promised. Matthew chapter 5, verse 6. Oh, the gladness of those who hunger and thirst for tzedakah, for they will be satisfied. Now, sometimes people pronounce that tzedakah, and that's fine as well, but we're going to use tzedakah. Now, what does it mean to hunger and thirst for after tzedakah, the righteousness? What does that mean? Well, the Hebrew term, or the biblical term, tzedakah, is a Hebrew word that is often used synonymously for words like this, for ideas like this: justice and truth and kindness and ethical conduct and help and deliverance. It's specifically applied in post-biblical Hebrew for the relief of poverty as an act of justice and moral behavior. The word tzedakah or tzedakah designates any work which involves aiding the poor, and it further supports the biblical concept that the poor have a right to food, they have a right to clothing, a right to shelter, and that those who have the means to provide those things have a moral obligation then to do so. Isn't that amazing? So here the Messiah, Mashiach, is pointing once again to the choices and to the actions of those who would follow after him. So if you want to live the accepted life, then live righteously and take care of those that are less fortunate than you are. That's what it means as we learn from the golden rule, what it's called. Rabbi Hillel said this. He said, "Whatsoever is hateful to thee, that do not do to your neighbor. This is all of the Torah, and the rest is an explanation of it. Go and be perfect, he says. Now remember that Rabbi Hillel taught Rabbi Gamliel, who was the teacher at the time of Yeshua, and Rabbi Gamliel taught Rabbi Shaul. We call him the Apostle Paul. So remember that Yeshua would go on then to repeat Hillel's words some 50 years later. So was he in agreement with the rabbis? Well, with many of them, of course. Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. By the way, ponder this. When the rabbis come up with these incredible thoughts, do you think they're coming up with it on their own? Or are they being inspired by the Ruach HaKodesh, by the Holy Spirit, by God himself? And that would mean then that Yeshua is the inspiration behind the rabbis that he's agreeing with, right? Okay, it says this in Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. It says, always treat others as you would like them to treat you. That sums up the teaching of the Torah and the prophets, the Nevi'im. Who said that? Rabbi Yeshua, 4 BC through 30 CE. So, which would then be repeated again by the rabbis in the Middle Ages. And here's an example of this. All things whatsoever ye would that others should do to you, do you the same to your brethren in the Torah and in the commandments. That's Maimonides. So Yeshua has a lot to say to us in the sermon about righteousness. And here he speaks of this hungering and this thirsting for righteousness in chapter 5, verse 6. But in chapter 5, verse 10, he says, he speaks of those who were persecuted for righteousness' sake. And in chapter 5, verse 20, he talks of a righteousness that exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. And in verses 21 through 48, then he expounds on a higher righteousness that goes beyond the strict requirements of the Torah. And in chapter 6, verse 33, he encourages his listeners to seek first the kingdom and the righteousness of God. So over and over and over again, he's talking about tzedakah, being righteous, being the one who does the right things, thinks the right things, acts on the right things. Isaiah chapter 32, verse 15 and forward, it says this, until the Spirit is poured upon us from on high, and the wilderness becomes a fruitful field, and the fruitful field is deemed a forest, then justice will dwell in the wilderness. And here's our word, and righteousness abide in the fruitful field. And the effect of righteousness will be peace. And the result of righteousness, quietness and trust forever. My people will abide in a peaceful habitation, in secure dwellings, and in quiet resting places. Don't you wish that was the case today for the Jewish people? And the prophet Daniel says this in Daniel 12:3. He says, and those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to what? To righteousness, like the stars forever and ever. Matthew 5:6, back to the Sermon on the Mount. Oh, the gladness of those who hunger and thirst for tzedakah, for they will be satisfied. The Mashiach in this sermon, he points us back over and over again to the imitation of God, that we have to imitate God who is righteous. We're to watch, we're to learn from our rabbi, the Messiah, and imitate how he lives, how he loves, how he cares, and to follow his lifestyle. He came to announce good news to the poor, heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom to the captives, to let out into light those who are bound in darkness, to proclaim the year of the favor of Adonai and the day of vengeance of our God, and to comfort all who mourn. To comfort all who mourn. Friends, this is the heartbeat of God, that he would comfort those who turn to him, who make the choice of going, you know, this life I was given as a gift from the creator of all that exists. And because he gave me the gift of life, breath in my lungs, the beating of my heart, I'm going to follow after him. I'm going to learn about the Creator. I'm going to learn to love him. I'm going to learn what he loves, and I'm going to love those things. And in the way that he cares for me, I'm going to care for others. And in the way he loves me, I'm going to love others. I'm going to accept others the way he's accepted me. And I'm going to look to what he has done to redeem me back, to buy me back, to purchase me out of this sinful situation, because no one is perfect. We all make mistakes. We all do things and think thoughts that we wish we hadn't have done. And we all know that when we look at leaves on a tree, or we look at the beautiful flowers, and we look at creation, we look at the beautiful animals that God has created, and we see the perfection of the way he's made the human body, just the eye alone, we understand that he is perfect. The God who created everything, the water that goes up and evaporates into the clouds, it fills the clouds and it waters the land, this cyclical system that God has created. Everything around us points to a perfect creator. So we recognize that we're not perfect like he is, but because of that, God has made a way for us to still have a relationship, that which is imperfect, us, with that which is perfect, he who is perfect, and that is God, the creator of all things. And he has allowed his son, the Messiah, to come the first time as Mashiach ben Yosef, the one who would come and suffer like Joseph. And he suffers for us. He suffers so that we can understand his suffering and we can be saved through his suffering. And then he comes again, which we're waiting for, as Mashiach ben David, the one who comes like David, to triumph over the enemies of Israel and those who are grafted in the people of God. Friends, as we continue the study in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, I pray that you understand how much God loves you. He sent his only begotten Son that you would understand the Messiah's love for you and all humanity. Until next time, shalom, shalom.